This is footage of a NASA astronaut driving a rover on the moon. And this is footage of me driving the new rover NASA is taking to the moon. Right now, we are entering the next space race. The US is aiming to build a moon base at the lunar South Pole by 2030, and to do it, they will need a rover. So I went all the way to California to visit the company building NASA's next Moon Rover, and let's just say, things got kind of crazy.
But they don't let you take this one to the McDonald's drive-thru.
No.
I got to spend a day at Astrolab playing with their rovers, and who better to show me around than their CEO and chief engineer.
So yeah, welcome to our headquarters here in Hawthorne, California. So I've been in space robotics my whole career. I started out at JPL and worked on several of the Mars rovers. I worked on Spirit and Opportunity, worked on Curiosity. After Curiosity landed on Mars, I made my way to SpaceX and worked on the Dragon program.
I'm Ryan Spelling. I'm the chief engineer here, and I have a long history of working at JPL or for JPL on Mars programs. I've designed all the robotic arms on Mars.
Astrolab was founded back in 2020 with the goal of improving the future of humanity by building vehicles for the moon and one day Mars. Their CEO Jared, who showed me around, spent years working at SpaceX as one of their key engineers before turning his focus to Moon Rovers.
Imagine we've landed on Mars. What's the next thing we got to do? To start making propellant or setting up power or whatever.
Yeah.
And so the conclusion was, basically, you need a mobility platform to...
How do we move stuff around?
Right, yeah.
Sure.
So it's just solving the last mile problem.
Astrolab's solution to this last mile problem was their flagship rover, FLEX. FLEX is the largest rover ever conceived for the moon. It has been designed to carry cargo around and perform tasks to support the Artemis astronauts over the coming years. Just like during the Apollo missions where they had their lunar roving vehicle, the Artemis astronauts will need a way to get around the moon too. So let's look at how the old moon buggy compares to FLEX. The first thing you'll notice when looking at FLEX is just how big it is compared to the old Apollo era LTV. The old rover was just over 3 meters long and weighed 210 kilograms when completely empty. It was capable of carrying about 500 kilograms around the moon, 2 astronauts with their gear. Now let's look at FLEX. It's much bigger in size and is capable of moving 1,600 kilograms of mass around the moon. That's like driving around carrying 20 people. 2 rovers built for the moon with drastically different goals. Apollo helped to get the astronauts around, while FLEX represents the future of the space economy, combining massive payload capacity with autonomy. I think we should take it for a spin.
This is our terrestrial prototype of the FLEX Rover. So yeah, you just step on up like this. So we're gonna stand up, okay? So we're currently in what's called crew down mode. So that, as you saw, it's pretty easy to get on and off. Right?
Yeah.
And
You just step in, yeah.
So it's all about maximizing useful time for astronauts.
Yeah.
And so that's another feature. So now we're at drive height, and I'm gonna do a little bit of driving, then I'll turn it over to you.
Jarrett first wanted to show me the different ways FLEX could drive. Just like how a normal car can drive in 2-wheel or 4-wheel drive, FLEX has a variety of different drive modes.
This is standard 4-wheel drive, so we have all 4 wheels driving, all 4-wheel steering as well. And then steering is intuitive. You just pull, in the direction that you want to drive. But we have a bunch of other drive modes, so we'll park it here for 1 second, and we'll do what's called a 0-point turn.
Yeah.
This steers all the wheels on a circle.
Yeah.
Now if we squeeze that, we can
Spin on the spot.
spin on the spot, turn on a dime.
I wish my car had this.
But we can also do what's called crabbing here. So,
Okay.
So why don't you do this one? You squeeze the dead man and then pull to the right.
Pull this way?
Yeah. So now we're going, perfectly lateral. And so go ahead, right or left.
And is that actually how quick it switches between the modes on the moon?
Yeah.
Now that I'd passed the tutorial, I got permission to take it for a spin. Now I know what you're thinking, because I was thinking it too. How how much does one of these cost? Astrolab were awarded a NASA contract for up to around $2 billion to develop FLEX, so I just had to ask.
And is it public how much one will cost once fully assembled, all of that?
No.
Not public.
I say if you have to ask, you can't afford it, you know?
Okay, yes.
I tried my best. Now, I really wanted to deep dive into why FLEX looks so different compared to the Apollo era LTV. Back in the 70s, they designed their rovers as a late addition. During Apollo 11 and 12, the astronauts could only walk around, so they were only able to explore a few hundred meters from the lander. So by Apollo 15, they had finally developed the lunar roving vehicle, but it was essentially just a dune buggy, only really useful for driving the astronauts around. And as you'd expect, FLEX is different.
At least for the next, several Artemis missions, right? The cadence is going to be something like once a year that the crew lands. They're there for a few days to up to maybe 2 weeks. The LTV may be required to support a mission here and then go somewhere entirely different, before the next human mission arrives.
Okay, but how do you control a rover that is on the moon from here on Earth?
So our goal is generally to do what we call supervised autonomy. So still have operators in the loop, but not joysticking.
It takes light 1.3 seconds to travel to the moon and 1.3 seconds for it to return, meaning it takes nearly 3 full seconds to send a message to FLEX and have it respond. It would basically be like trying to play a video game with really bad lag. Sounds like a bad idea, and it's gone wrong before.
The Russians operated the Lunokhod rovers that way. But that was ultimately their undoing.
In 1973, the Soviets had put rovers on the moon that were being driven by humans on Earth using TV images and a joystick. There was practically no onboard autonomy. They drove the Lunokhod 2 rover into a steep crater with the lid open and coated it in dust. This dust eventually filled the radiators and caused it to overheat. They weren't able to react in time to save the rover because of this lag, and so FLEX uses supervised autonomy. The controllers basically use the camera view and click wherever they want the rover to go. It's then up to FLEX to use its built-in algorithms to find a safe path there. For this to work, you of course need some really good sensors and cameras on the rover for FLEX to have all of the information it needs to stay safe.
We have on each corner lighting and navigation and hazard detection cameras, as well as cameras that kind of look in the workspace of the arm.
I even got to go into their workshop where they were testing these sensors.
So this behind me is what we call groundhog. What's going on here is it's basically representing our perception system on FLEX. You need to be able to detect, perceive hazards far enough out such that you can warn the astronauts or do emergency braking.
What are you training the rovers to be able to see? Because obviously here we train it to not hit the kid that jumps into the road. On the moon, what are we looking out for?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in some ways, it's a much easier problem.
Yeah, there's no kids.
Right, because everything's kind of staying put for the most part.
Yeah.
Right? The challenge is mostly around the lighting conditions.
Yeah, it takes you a while because you're at the South Pole, right?
Yeah, sure.
The sun's always at the
Along
side.
that, okay.
It's always like you're driving into the sun.
Yeah,
And it's awful. It's awful. So all the cameras, everything we have, if you're going into the sun, they can't see anything.
And so how do the cameras address that problem?
We use infrared.
While cars on Earth mostly use sensors and cameras that operate in the visible portion of the light spectrum, FLEX's cameras will operate in the infrared for a very specific reason. Most of the sun's light is actually found in the visible portion of the spectrum, so by using infrared cameras, FLEX can bypass a lot of that glare. And this gives FLEX another advantage. By mounting lights to FLEX that operate in the infrared, they can illuminate these shadows and detect any dangerous obstacles without completely flooding the area with bright spotlights. This helps astronauts navigate on the moon safely, but also saves a ton of energy, using up to 90% less than traditional optical light bars that would allow astronauts to just directly see into the shadows. By combining these cameras, lighting, and LiDAR, FLEX will be fully equipped with everything it needs to rapidly detect any dangers, warn the astronauts with alerts and sound notifications, and if it comes to it, take emergency control from the astronauts and prevent the first car crash on the moon. Now, just before we get back to driving Moon Rovers, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Odoo. As I'm sure you know by now, Odoo is an all-in-one management software that gives creators and entrepreneurs tools to simplify their day-to-day management. Like most YouTubers, I love making these videos, but I don't love all the boring admin tasks that come with it, like tracking expenses. Thankfully, Odoo Expenses keeps everything organized in one place, and it will save you time when running your business. You can submit your expense receipts from your computer, phone, or even just by emailing them. Then Odoo groups all of your relevant expenses into a single report, speeding up the approval process. You, your team, and your manager can even directly communicate, such as adding comments, explaining, or clarifying specific expenses right in the app. Managers can then easily review and approve them. Everything gets automatically processed in the accounting books, and it's as easy as that. The best thing is, your first app with Odoo is completely free for life with unlimited hosting and support, so you can try it out today completely for free with no strings attached. Now, let's get back to driving a Moon Rover. So now I knew Flex was safe, I had to know how fast they could take it. All of the driving footage you've seen so far is only at 25% of its top speed, and I have a feeling they want to take it even faster. Astrolab is partnered with Venturi, an electric vehicle company in Europe who help to provide the wheels and the batteries, and they certainly love to go fast.
Venturi has a long history in electric vehicles. They hold the world speed record for electric cars, world speed record for electric motorcycles, which they actually set on the Kennedy Space Shuttle runway.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's so funny.
NASA's requirement is for the rover to be able to drive at 15 kilometers per hour, but the record is a little bit faster. During Apollo 16, they held the Lunar Grand Prix. Astronaut John Young drove the Apollo rover downhill in an attempt to set the record, and they got up to 17 kilometers per hour. And I have a good feeling Astrolab is going to try and beat that record over the next few years. At the end of the tour, Jarrett decided to speed up the rover to max speed. Here's how it looked.
Full speed. Oh my gosh. I don't know if it looks quick, but that feels quick, yeah.
Can you imagine driving that fast on the moon when you're bouncing around at 1/6 of Earth's gravity? Sounds pretty fun. One of the first things I noticed about the rover was the wheels. They literally had to reinvent the wheel for the moon.
Tires are an important part of the overall suspension system. It's literally where the rubber meets the road. In this case, though, we can't use any rubber.
Yes.
Because the moon is so cold,
yeah,
and it's a hard vacuum that rubber just doesn't do well. It basically turns to effectively glass. It gets very brittle.
Sure.
So what's neat about these wheels is that the more mass you put on them, the more traction they have.
Because it spreads this bottom surface area out by squishing it, compressing
Exactly.
it. Like
Yeah.
letting your tires down, yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Because the wheels are made of this intricate cable and spring structure, as they get compressed down, the bottom surface is flattened out, which improves the grip.
This is actually the highest performing traction tire NASA's ever tested.
Really?
Yeah.
And what is this outer surface made of? It feels like felt nearly.
Yeah, it's
like,
actually Nomex, you know,
Nomex.
like flame-proof
Yeah,
material.
sure, yeah, okay.
Or bulletproof.
Like Kevlar.
Kevlar,
Yeah, sure.
there's Kevlar and Nomex.
Okay, it's time to let you in on a little secret. Astrolab doesn't have just one rover, they have two, and their other one is heading to the moon later this year. This is actually a really recent development. In July last year, NASA cancelled its Viper rover mission set to land on the moon in December 2025, and this left a spot open on the Griffin lander.
We had about a year to go from signing the launch contract to delivering the rover to the Cape.
And when you signed, there was no flip.
There was no design,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jarrett called me up and he goes, we have an opportunity to go to the moon in a year. He goes, can you design a rover that takes all the pieces, the good bits that we have from LTV,
Yeah.
and fit them into a chassis that is similar to the Mars or the Moon Rover that NASA canceled, Viper.
And so they got to work. With just over a year to build a rover from scratch to meet the deadline, they looked at all the parts they had and decided to take all the best components of Flex and package it into a smaller frame.
yeah, so this is our terrestrial test version of the Flip rover.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is our rover called Flop. We have
Flop.
Flip and Flop.
Flip flop.
And Flop is our test rover.
Okay.
The main objective for Flip for us is really elevating a lot of our technology that goes into Flex.
Sure.
And so these are the full-scale tires that are going to go on Flex, and you can see here this is a full-scale wheel actuator.
Yeah.
So these are massively overpowered for what this rover needs.
I see. But you're wanting to test them in situ
Exactly.
to get as much data as possible for Flex.
Yeah. We're about to undertake egress testing. So one of the kind of spicier parts of the mission is getting off the lander down to the ground. So this is actually a mock-up of the Griffin lander, at least the parts of it that we care about.
Yeah, sure.
So the rover will start out up there
On the top?
on the top,
Okay.
and this is a little higher than the surface of the moon will be approximately here.
Okay.
So it's this last part, where these ramps are at 75 degrees.
That's very, yeah, you're right.
That
It's
is,
nearly vertical, yeah.
Since then, they've actually done this testing. They basically used the straps to rappel flop down off the model lander, and it went well. So as long as the launch is on track, Flip will be doing this same rappel descent onto the moon in December. And how could I leave Astrolab without actually seeing the real rover going to the moon? So we headed into the clean room. But first, we had to get dressed up.
Yeah, these are nice ones. Someone must work in fashion at Astrolab.
So this is our rover integration high bay. What you see here is actually, this is the flight chassis for the Flip rover. So this chassis is going to the moon.
This is, okay, wow, yeah. And so when will this one leave to go to Cape Canaveral?
It's looking like we're targeting, near the end of the year. So ideally around November.
Their attention to detail and testing was honestly inspiring. I feel like I was starting to understand really just how hard it is to build something that is going to the moon, and everything seemed to hinge on this one main problem: temperature.
The hardest problem to solve really for LTV is thermal management. The moon goes through, day-night cycles that are 2 weeks long, right?
Sure.
Each. So 2 weeks of uninterrupted sunlight, followed by 2 weeks of uninterrupted darkness.
Yeah, so the moon is so interesting in the sense it doesn't have a atmosphere. Like Mars has an atmosphere, so it's almost easy.
Yeah.
Whereas the moon, there's no atmosphere. So if you're in the sun, you're super hot. If you're in the shade, you're super cold.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. So this side of the rover could be really, really hot. This side of the rover is going to be really cold.
Sure.
So you're going to get some weird twists in the chassis and those type of things.
Sure.
So everything, all these fancy brackets you see here are to allow the chassis to twist, but not twist the avionics.
So if some parts of the rover can be really hot while other parts are freezing cold all simultaneously, how do you prevent things from breaking?
Everything here is about thermal isolation. We call this the hot dog warmer.
Okay.
We have extra insulation in there to keep the batteries happy.
Like Jarrett said, nights on the moon are 2 weeks long of uninterrupted darkness at minus 230 degrees Celsius. Flex needs to survive these long lunar nights. Here's how it works. At the South Pole, Flex has to deal with extreme temperature changes. It could be sat at the edge of a crater where the daylight side of Flex is 130 degrees Celsius, while the night side in the shade is minus 250 degrees. That is way colder than Antarctica, and there is no air convection to help alleviate these differences. All the materials on Flex have to factor this in. Rubber doesn't work in these conditions, it becomes brittle like glass. Metals warp and bend. Everything has to be accounted for. Because the moon is tidally locked with the Earth, the lunar nights can last well over 100 hours, and since Flex relies on solar power, the rover needs to be able to survive the lunar night. The batteries store enough energy to allow Flex to sleep, heating its essential systems until the sun rises once more. A beautiful piece of modern engineering hibernating through the lunar night. The real big winner for Astrolab is the fact that Flex is a modular, multi-mission rover. These vehicles are literally going to form the backbone of lunar logistics.
But the real cost savings is really in the modularity, right?
Yeah, of course,
The whole history of rovers has been very bespoke. You do, one mission to Mars once a decade, you spend several $1 billion on it, and it kind of lands with all the capability it's ever going to have, and it's a fixed capability. Our approach here is to have an evolving capability. So through the modular interfaces, through the ability to pick up and put down implements and cargo, we can basically serve a huge array of customers and use cases and evolve it over time to get more and more use out of it, more and more utility.
Since the platform is modular, you can use it really however you want. In fact, back in 2021, Astrolab worked with JPL to demonstrate a marsupial rover concept. They used FLEX to carry JPL's Axel rover and simulate exploring a crater on the moon. FLEX supported and deployed the little rover to reach places deep in the crater where FLEX couldn't go. The rover can serve sort of like a mothership for smaller robots to explore the moon and do it all autonomously. The work they're doing to develop these rovers is really important now more than ever, as the US is gearing up for the next space race with China and Russia. Last year, China and Russia joined forces in an agreement saying they were going to build a 100 kilowatt nuclear reactor on the moon by 2035. And the US has just responded, saying they are going to beat them to it by a full 5 years, putting one on the moon in just 2030. But what's the rush? Well, the acting NASA chief said it himself. They basically want to claim the best part of the moon for the US. While no country can own parts of the moon under the Outer Space Treaty, whoever gets to the South Pole first could establish a protective perimeter around their base, effectively denying everyone else access to the important resources like water. So if the US want to win the next space race, they will need technology like FLEX to get the job done.
Very cool. Let's go to the moon.